Welcome to Cambridge Forum discussing Yellow, Decoding Emily Dickinson with Lynn Margulis, Distinguished University Professor in the Department of Geosciences at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I'm Pat Zerke, Director of the Forum. 19th century Amherst poet Emily Dickinson remains an enigmatic and fascinating figure in American literature and popular culture. While the poetic genius of the woman in white is widely recognized, the person behind the poems remains a bit of a mystery. Biographers, most recently Lyndall Gordon in Lives Like Loaded Guns, have looked to the data of history, letters, memoirs, to explain Dickinson. Others have looked to her poetry as a code to her personality and hidden inner life. In 1962, Swiss-born Hans Werner Luescher wrote to T.J. Wilson, who was then director of Harvard University Press. And Luescher said, "In the course of my painstaking analysis of the symbols, similes, and parables contained in Emily Dickinson's poems, I have come to discover the central fact of the life of the poet." Our speaker, Lynn Margulis, brings a unique perspective to these attempts to decode the central fact in Dickinson's life and work. Margulis, as you've heard, is a distinguished university professor in the Department of Geosciences at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, the 1999 recipient of the National Medal of Science. The Library of Congress has created a permanent archive of her papers. Her publications, more than 10 books and 130 scientific articles, span a wide range of topics. She's probably best known for the development of the theory of symbiogenesis, and she's also acknowledged for her microbiological work with James E. Lovelock on his Gaia theory. But she's also an Amherst neighbor of Emily Dickinson, and Emily happens to be her favorite poet. So how does one of the most original scientific thinkers in the world today respond to Luescher's life work of decoding Dickinson? How is his work related to that of another Amherst neighbor, Ruth Owen Jones? How did Margulis, the evolutionist, become interested in Dickinson anyway? These are some of the questions she will answer as she explains the meaning of yellow, decoding Emily Dickinson. So welcome back to Cambridge Forum, Lynn Margulis.
Thank you, Pat Zerke. Her name is pronounced Zerke, even though it's not spelled that way at all. And my name is pronounced Margulis, even though it sort of is spelled that way. I'm so glad to be back here because this is the place where books are read and people converse, and not necessarily through cell phones and text editing. Anyway, so I want to tell you a story, and I've never told it in public before. It may be halting, about my two Amherst neighbors, Emily Dickinson, who, although she died in 1886, still talks to me, and Ruth Owen Jones, who is not here today because she's having her hip replaced in Burlington, north of here, and would love to have been here, and I strongly suggest that you invite her to one of these meetings next time. To see the summer sky is poetry, though never in a book it lie. True poems flee, said Emily Dickinson, and I have a lot of pictures here, which I'm not showing you until you come up afterwards when we're off the air, so to speak. Arguably, Emily Dickinson was the greatest poet writing in the English language, and this new book, which I recommend by Lyndall Gordon, I actually met her in South Africa 6 weeks ago, called Emily Dickinson's life A Life Like a Loaded Gun, and she concluded that her big emotional attachment is the family feud, and I'll tell you something about the family feud. The feud was after Emily died, and her papers were in question. Before I tell you that, I want to talk about this Hans Werner Luescher, and how I got to know about him. And tell you right up front what my goal is coming to the Cambridge Forum, and that is to preserve more than 100 boxes and more than 44 years of work on this decoding of Dickinson that was done by this Swiss man. And I want to ask, how valid is Luescher's interpretation of the central fact of the life of the poet? Well, Hans Luescher says in his introduction that a shy, retiredly living country girl, seemingly bare of all significant experience, quote, could press such exciting juices, caused astonishment from the beginning. And he also goes on to say, he started to translate her work into German. I'll tell you the story about that. And found, as he went on, that let me say it in his words. First of all, he said, the translation of the poem must keep faith with its inner sense and not the verbal trappings. And a hindering paradox, in spite of simple, easily translatable language, Emily Dickinson's poems are, and I quote, obscure to the point of unintelligibility. And then he says, after years, 44 years, thousands of hours, I unraveled Emily's riddle work. Significant aspects of this work make it undoubtedly one of the most amazing mental performances of a single human being, and I feel obliged to communicate this to the public. Well, I share that obligation. The fight was between, I think I'm going to skip this. I'll tell you afterwards. The poems were never published in Emily's lifetime. 4 of them were, and they made them rhyme better, and then she never published another thing. But Mabel Loomis Todd, who figures very, very clearly in this story, was unabashedly Austin Dickinson, Emily's closest friend her whole life, and her brother. She was the person that prepared the poems after Emily's death for publication. And I want to read, I still want to read, but I don't see I have a piece of paper. Anyway, I want to read the review. Can I go get it? I shouldn't do that. Okay. I'll read the review to you, the rotten review that happened in 1892 after she died, and I have to read it for you to understand how bad it was. But at any rate, so Mabel Loomis Todd worked on the poems and brought them to publication. In the end, there are almost 2,000 of them, and 1,700, and about 40 were published by Lavinia Dickinson and Mabel Loomis Todd, who took the side of Austin in this terrible fight with Susan Dickinson, who was Austin's wife, but for the last part of her life was rejected by her husband and was having sexual intercourse in the house where Emily was living, and they would not leave that's Austin and Mabel. They would not leave their spouses. They would not deny the greatest love that ever occurred. And this went on, and it went on after Emily's death. Emily tried to stay out of it. But without Mabel Loomis Todd, we would have none of these poems at all. How do I know about this? A woman named Hardy came to UMass, a young assistant professor, a very enthusiastic one. She wanted my help to bring the man who mistook his wife for a hat, who is Oliver Sacks, to give the McDonald lecture. It's a $1,000 lecture for chemistry, for the chemistry department. I called my friend who knows Oliver Sacks, and he said to me, well, you can try to get him, but he pays a woman $100,000 a year to keep all of these invitations away, and I doubt if he will come. Try anyway. I was editing him at the time, so I called him, and this lady answered the phone and said, what do you want? And I said, what I did, I want you to give the McDonald lecture to UMass in the chemistry department. And she said, well, I doubt very much that he'll do that. And in fact, I cannot forward this message unless you write a letter and tell him exactly what you want. And I don't think for $1,000 he's going to come and give the honored chemistry lecture at UMass. So I call back my friend and say, and he's Raoul Hoffman, He's a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry from Ithaca from Cornell. And he tells me, yes, that's true. It's going to be very hard to get him. I said, Roald Hoffman, why don't you come? And he said, I'd be glad to come. And he gave an absolutely smashing chemistry talk. And he said, the only thing I want about Amherst is I want to come to see Emily Dickinson's house, because he's a poet himself, Roald Hoffman. I said, sure. We arranged for Cindy Dickinson, no relative, the director of the Amherst Museum, the Emily Dickinson Museum, and Ruth Owen Jones, who's the hero of the story as we go on. And these two women took Roald Hoffman around Emily Dickinson's house, and he says, in 2 years, I want to come and recite my poems in this house. He's not done it yet, but maybe he will. And we all had a wonderful time. Roald Hoffman was not, let's put it this way, Oliver Sacks was not missed at all in any of this. And 2 weeks later, I get this letter. I get this letter with a package from Roald Hoffman. So, 10 days after you introduced me to Emily Dickinson's house, and through that Emily Dickinson's presence, I get the attached letter and prospectus. A long story, but an interesting one, from a marketing manager of a Swiss company whose father-in-law, a proletariat intellectual, spent decades analyzing and translating Emily Dickinson's poems. I'm sure, not to your surprise, uncovered rich sexual imagery in the poetry. I thought you'd like it. The story is fascinating. Amsler's proposal is workmanlike. I didn't have much advice to him except to add one analysis of a poem to his proposal, reasonably salacious. We will get to that. I will read it to you. Could you show this to your friend, the woman who took us around the house? That is Ruth Owen Jones, who's been working on a book about Dickinson for many years. Could you show this to your friend? I think I lost her card. She is trying to publish her own book, I know, but maybe she has some advice for Mr. Ambler, and that she should write to him amicably. Roald Hoffman. Okay. Here is the letter that was in the package. The package was a thick package of this man Lucius Work. Dear Sir, to Roald Hoffman, Nobel laureate in chemistry, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. Dear Sir, friends have drawn my attention to your recent visit, this is Hoffman's recent visit, to Italy and your declared interests, besides chemistry, in literature and poetry. The enclosed article from Corriere della Sera, this newspaper in Italy, of September 30th, this is 2007, may be of interest to you. They encouraged me to approach you with a subject that has kept me busy for many years and still does. Hans Werner Luescher was the second husband of my mother. He was born in 1901, grew up in Switzerland, emigrated to Canada in 1923 and to the USA in 1929, where he later married my mother, who had divorced my father and had followed her teenage love. In Los Angeles, Hans Werner earned his living as a carpenter during the day and worked on philosophical writings, essays, and day books deep into the night. He was attracted to the poems of Emily Dickinson and decided to translate them into German. He grouped 384 poems into 2 volumes, hoping unsuccessfully to publish them in German or in Schweizerdeutsch. It was during this translation work that Hans made his sensational discovery. He found that Emily had created a secret language while writing superb poetry on one hand and recording her sexual life on a second secret level. Hans analyzed 1,154 of the 1,700 or so poems, and he created a glossary of 257 major symbols. Upon his death, which was 1991, he left his written manuscripts to me. It was on his deathbed, hoping that I would succeed in bringing his work to publication. In the course of my endeavors to this effect, I came into contact with Margaret Freeman, a professor of English in Los Angeles Valley College, who is retired back in Massachusetts, who consented to act as a consultant. Once I finished transcribing Hans's Hans's manuscripts into my computer, we began the form of a book, the 200, 300-page book. We contacted 10 major university publishers and submitted our book proposal. In the end, they all informed us that for reasons of capacity and lack of necessary funds, they felt compelled to desist from getting into this voluminous project. Since then, we have not progressed any further, and we fear the important work one day may get lost and forgotten. I attach a copy of the book proposal to University of Virginia Press, which will give you an overview of Hans Luescher's work and discovery. The purpose of this letter to Dr. Hoffman is whether or not you possibly have a suggestion for our further actions, as you have no doubt much better knowledge of how American literary world ticks than I can possibly have back here in good old Switzerland, so far away from Emily Dickinson's land, with my humble background of a retired marketing manager in a Swiss chemical company. I thank you in advance for any suggestions or help you may give in this manner. Well, I was the Eastman Fellow in Oxford. I called this man Rolf Amsler, who wrote this letter, and I told him I was Emily Dickinson's neighbor, and I asked him if I could come and talk to him about this work, and I ended up going and floating down the Rhine in a inner tube in the summertime, and I went to his house, and he told me this story about on the deathbed of his mother's second husband, he promised and swore that it would be his wonderful job to try to publish this material. And I have pictures here of it was a bigger room than this in his basement, completely covered with boxes, and Rolf Amsler, had been trying to organize by date and by subject and so on, so that it was comprehensively archived, mostly handwritten material. And I have pictures of this very handsome Hans Werner Luescher and my trip to Basel and so on. So what I'm going to give you is a few poems first of all, this is not my analysis. It is Hans Luescher's analysis, about which Margaret Freeman, the scholar to whom he went, said, when everybody asked her, do you agree with Luescher? Do you think he's right about this decoding? She said the same thing that I say, the same thing that Ruth Owen says. I cannot read Emily Dickinson's poems in the same since I've read this Luescher analysis. That's what I tell you. I cannot do this, and that's why we call it yellow. I'm going to give you only about 10 of these code words directly translated, and then read some poems, and then read some poems with you knowing what these code words are. And yellow is semen. Let's start there. Blue is the glans penis in optimum erection. Sunrise is the glans in ejaculation. Sun is the beginning of male ejaculation. Morning and east and day, these are words, and sunset, these are words over and over again with Emily. Morning and east is female arousal after male climax. Sunset is the penis glands going into collapse. Day, which is over and over in Emily Dickinson's work, is ejaculation or sexual intercourse. Earth is Earth of the females, the innermost vaginal region. Eternity is the penis phase of intercourse. And hat, the sunshine threw its hat away. Hat is condom, contraceptives. Yes, they were very much in use in that time. Okay, so I'm going to give you two examples of Luescher, and what he calls them the Rosetta Stone. And one is When I Have Seen the Sun Emerge, and the other is I Started Early, Took My Dog. So first I will give you Emily straight, her poem. When I have seen the sun emerge from his amazing house and leave a day at every door without the incident of fame or accident of noise, the earth has seemed to me a drum pursued by little boys. This is what Luescher says this really means. When I have seen the glands engross on its amazing stem, bring intercourse to every door, leave seed in every place, without a need of female help, preempting all her joys or accident of noise, my body seemed to me a drum pursued by little boys. Okay, this poem, everybody who's an Emily fan knows. I started early. This is now Emily. It's a Rosetta Stone of a poem, a translation poem for Hans. I started early, took my dog and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me, and frigates in the upper floor extended hempen hands, presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sand. But no man moved me until the tide went past my simple shoe, and past my apron and my belt, and past my bodice too, and made as he would eat me up as wholly as a dew upon a dandelion sleeve, and then I started too, and he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle, and then my shoes would overflow with pearl, until we met the solid town. No man he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the sea withdrew. Okay, this is Hans's version. I started early, took my dog, the glands, and visited the sea, the seminal emission, and mermaids in the basement, seamen in the testes, came out to look at me rise through the urethra, and frigates in the upper floor, seamen ejaculated through the gland's lip, and extended hempen hands, the metal ring around ship's mast, to which ropes are tied to guide the sail, clearly a penis in ejaculation symbol, says Hans. Presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sand, the vaginal cup stranded in the semen, but no man moved me till the tide went past my simple shoe and past my apron and my belt and past my bodice too, graphically demonstrating the flooding effect of the vaginal cup, and made as he would eat me up as wholly as a Jew. The Jew is the female effluence, upon a dandelion's sleeve. Dandelion's the penis, the sleeve is the contraceptive. And then I started too, and he followed close behind. I felt his silver, watch those words, yellow, silver, pearl, it's all semen, upon my ankle, and then my shoe would overflow with pearl, until we met the solid town, the absolutely tight, this is Hans, all of it's Hans, absolutely tight contact, peak excitation and release. No man he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the scene withdrew. And he says that these lines, the lines I just read you about Jew and dandelion, encapsulate the whole body of Dickinson's poems. Anyway, I felt the silver heel upon my ankle. You've heard enough of that. Okay, now I really want, this is the poem that I think tells me about this. Nature rarer uses yellow. That's semen. You don't get enough of it. Nature rarely uses yellow than another hue. Saves she all of that for sunsets. Remember what sunsets are? I'll tell you if you don't remember. Prodigal of blue. Blue is symbol for men, male. Spending scarlet like a woman. Yellow she affords, nature affords. Yellow she affords, only scarcely and selectly like a lover's words. Okay. Will there ever be a morning? Will there really be a morning? Is there such a thing as day? Could I see it from the mountains if I were as tall as they? Has it feet morning? Let me just, I had this all for you. Morning, east, female arousal after male climax. Okay. Will there really be a morning? Is there such a thing as day? Could I see it from the mountains if I were as tall as they? Has it feet like water lilies? Has it feathers like a bird? Is it brought from famous countries of which I have never heard? Oh, some scholar, oh, some sailor, oh, some wise man from the skies, please tell a little pilgrim where the place called morning lies. Well, I want to tell you who the wise man, the scholar, and the sailor is. And this is the key. This is Ruth's key. Ruth Owen Jones, my neighbor, writes this in the Emily Dickinson Journal in volume 2 at number 11 in 2002. She calls her piece Neighbor and Friend and Bridegroom. And she thinks this is the key, and I tend to agree with her. And I think the scholar, sailor, and wise man was the person being referred to. A wife at daybreak I shall be. Sunrise, Hast thou a flag for me? At midnight I am yet a maid. How short it takes to make it bride. Then midnight I have passed from thee unto the east in victory. Midnight, good night, I hear them call. The angels bustle in the hall. Softly my future climbs the stair. I fumble at my childhood's prayer. So soon to be a child no more. Eternity, I'm coming, sir. Master, I've seen the face before. And the big question, there are 3 master letters, is who was the master? And there were there's a lot of stuff out there. People have said it's Charles Wadsworth, a man she saw 3 times in her life. Other people have said it was that very flirtatious and famous Samuel Bowles, the editor, who did come and visit her family's house, who had this very grim wife. Other people have said it's was the other one? I forget. But anyway, none of them are he. William Smith Clark, which is Ruth's thesis, is Emily Dickinson's master figure. Would you raise your hand if you've heard of him? He founded the University of Massachusetts. He, as the first person to have a PhD from Germany in chemistry botany, it was the same thing. From Wohler, the man who showed that urea is an organic compound. It's not a vital compound. Anyway, it's a carbon compound. And I have pictures of him saying, boys, be ambitious. Everybody in Hokkaido, Japan knows who he is because he founded in the North Island, in the Sapporo Island of Japan, he founded the first Yankee agricultural school, which is now the University of Hokkaido. It has 25,000 students. It had none when he went. He went with a big entourage, and he was, and here's a quote, he was her neighbor. He had to walk through her father's property to get to his house on Leslie Street in Amherst. They were in classes together. They were both students of Hitchcock. He had 13 children. He had, 7 or 8 of them survived. He was very busy. Okay, here's a description of him. It's a description, a contemporary description. William Smith Clark, PhD chemistry and botany in University of Göttingen in Germany. Young, spirited, dashing, personally, socially attractive, a brilliant talker, a good listener too, full of anecdotes, life of the party, cocky and a bit conceited. And we know that he loved women because it was documented that he had an affair when he was a colonel in the Civil War with Clara Barton, our famous nurse. And the authors did not realize that William Smith Clark was the same William Smith Clark. Anyway, at UMass, we have a wonderful statue of him. And A Wife at Daybreak I Shall Be. His wife was the daughter of the richest man in the Pioneer Valley at the time. I know his name, I have to see. Anyway, his wife was named Harriet, but she was called Queenie all the time, and there's a key to that in the poetry here. Okay, Samuel Williston, that's what I'm thinking of. It was Clark's father-in-law, one of the richest men in all of New England. He made buttons, actually, wooden buttons. And he was the president of the East Hampton Bank. He amassed a fortune. He bought the house, the Amherst house, which is it's not there anymore, but the hill is right there, for Harriet and Will. Between 1855 and 1873, Harriet Keopuolani, because she was named after a queen in Hawaii because they had been missionaries in Hawaii. They had been in Hawaii. She was born in Hawaii. Harriet and Will had 11 children, 6 girls, 5 boys. Some descendants are still around. 7 survived for long ages. And in the wonderful book called by Maki, who is Japanese, who wrote Yankee in Hokkaido, which is the history of William Smith Clark. It's a dashing history. And there's Clark Hall, Clark Road. I mean, if you guys have been to Amherst, there's Clarks everywhere. Anyway, he wrote in the book, while Clark and Dickinson must have met, undoubtedly they knew each other no more than slightly, because they kept it really quiet and they burnt everything. And in the master letter number 2 is the following sentence from Emily to her master. There are 3 very long and very explicit master letters. I wish with a might I cannot repress that mine were the queen's place. A wife at daybreak I shall be. And, well, I want to tell you one other thing. Here's a place where I think that Luescher is wrong. Under the word will, which is used a lot in her poetry, Luescher writes, expressive of the dominant force in the sex act, which is usually the male one, but with the female one present under repression or voluntary yield. From the 1870s, says Luescher, onward, her will begins to dominate. Will stands primarily for the strong intent and self-absorption of each partner with means and methods to arrive at his own requirement. And I say, okay, this is what his summary code in the list for will is: strong intent to arrive at his or her sexual requirement. And I say, no, he's not right. He's incorrect here. Will is the name of William Smith Clark. And if you read it that way, you see that that's what it is. William was William Smith Clark. Okay, do I have 5 minutes? Yeah. Just about 5 minutes. Okay, let me do one more poem. The last poem. Okay, so I think her father, Emily's father, her grandfather was a bloody genius. He was unbelievable. He founded Amherst College. He built that church, that Protestant, Puritan Congregationalist church, probably very much like this on the inside. I haven't been on it. He built the house. He spent everybody else's money in town, and he died in ignominy, if that's the word, in Ohio. This is Emily Dickinson's grandfather. Her father was the treasurer of Amherst. He once wrote letters saying he thinks his son can write. He didn't notice he had daughters for the most part. And he was very pecuniarious with money. So I think this is a wonderful Emily poem. For each ecstatic instant, we must an anguish pay in keen and quivering ratio to the ecstasy. For each beloved hour, sharp pittances of years, bitter contested farthings, and coffers heaped with tears. And she's talking about her mother and what they tried to do to her brother, who was the treasurer for Amherst College, too. Okay. The last one is let's just read this again. Morning, day, these things are explicit sexual descriptions. Will there really be a morning? Is there such a thing as day? Could I see it from the mountains where if I were as tall as they? Has it feet like water lilies? Has it feathers like a bird? Is it brought from famous countries of which I have never heard? He was abroad a great deal when she was having this affair for 7 years. Oh, some scholar, oh, some sailor, oh, some wise man from the skies, please to tell a little pilgrim where the place called morning lies. Okay, let's do the last thing here. He has fascinating stories. He found a crystal in New Hampshire when his father couldn't pay for, this is William Smith Clark, when his father couldn't pay his tuition, he sold it to the Smithsonian and was able to pay for his tuition for a year, and at the end of his life, he made very bad investments in silver mines in the West, and he lost all credibility in the town as well. He died 3 months before she did in 1886, and in Mabel Loomis Todd's diary, it says, William Smith Clark died today. You know what that must have meant to her. And she died 3 months later. Okay, here are my conclusions. Emily Dickinson did have an intense literary life, as Lyndall Gordon in her Lives Like Loaded Guns notes. Dickinson enjoyed a voluminous, whimsical, shockingly original correspondence. I didn't have time to read it to you. I can maybe read it later. With Susan Dickinson, her brother's wife, her brother Austin, her Norcross cousins, and several other people. She had very little, almost no social life after her friends went away and got married, and she lost contact with them. Almost no social life at all. She had no reproductive life. Her intense sexual life, mainly between 1857 and 1865, that's her ages from 27 to 35, fueled her genius. It released the energy permitting the emergence of talent, generated superb poetry. It gave her the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Hans Luescher discovered this. He did detect the central fact in the life of the poet, but unlike Ruth Owen Jones, he is completely incorrect about the master figure, who he says is a guy living in Springfield, and they went over the mountains 4 hours, and everybody saw that person when they came. Anyway, so my question is, we can talk about this, what is the fate of the roomful of boxes? And I feel very strongly, and I have the opportunity, to bring them to the Library of Congress. If they go to the Jones Library, they'll be sold and bossed and broken up immediately. If they go to the Harvard Library, there'll be still problems. If they go to the Pennsylvania Library, this is where they are. They're all scattered. There are horrible fights about who owns them, based on the feud. And I say they shouldn't go to none of those places. Amsler himself has been given this opportunity, but he's written me and said, I don't want to give up the copyright, because he doesn't understand he doesn't give up the copyright. If he gives them to me as a gift, they will go into my archives in the Library of Congress, and they will be protected, and he can write down whatever he wants. Scholars, with permissions of their major professors, can see them. Anyone who's justifiable can see them. And what happens to them is absolutely up to him if he gives them to me. He has to give them to me, though. And my archivist, whose name is Leo Bruno, is an unbelievably wonderful guy and wants to help with this to get these papers over here. But he's going to retire at the end of this year, so we have the rest of the year. So that's all I want to say now. Thank you.
Actually, Lynn, you should probably stay at that microphone because people will be asking you questions, starting with me. But first, let me remind the radio audience, you're listening to Cambridge Forum as we continue our discussion of Yellow, Decoding Emily Dickinson with scientist and author Lynn Margulis. So, Lynn, you touched very briefly on the quest to preserve this archive. Can you expand on that goal of yours a little bit? If Luescher is incorrect in his detailed analysis, what do you see this basement full of boxes doing?
Well, first of all, I think he's only incorrect about who's at the other end of the penis. Really, literally, I do. I think he's correct. A lot of the imagery and his deep. I mean, he does this kind of textual analysis that I don't know. And even if he's not correct, these papers should be made available to scholars who are interested. There's so many of them. They should be made available. And if I were to write it, they should be made available to anyone who's legitimate, who wants to read them. Right now, Amsler is not only the owner, he's the guardian. And his statement now, I've had my lawyer send him a note that says the only thing he'd have to sign wouldn't cost anything, he'd just sign it. Because he told me that that's what he wants to do, is to preserve these things. He's 76, and he says he has a few good years left in him, and he's in perfect health, and he wants to organize them better, and he doesn't want to let them go. He's not analyzing them at all. He doesn't. English is not his native language. He's not into poetry, but he wants to be sure that what goes. There's a lot of, and he wants also the entire Hans Luescher. Hans Luescher was a photographer. He took a lot of stuff in the West of Indians and so on. He wants all of Luescher's stuff archived. That will not be a problem. So I think, I mean, we may win this. I don't know. Okay.
So who else has seen these papers?
Margaret Freeman has seen them in detail, and she's this excellent scholar. Ruth has seen the same papers I have, and she says what we all say. They bear proper study the way poetry should be analyzed. They bear discussion among people who really know about this stuff. And we all agree with that. I mean, no scholar that has 44 years of work and 100 book papers can be right about everything. The question is he right about anything? And I think he is. I think the question you asked me before was why. I'm going to go and get that review. Why this person who had no apparent external life at all has written poems that have been translated into many languages, who move all sorts of people, who admit that so much is incomprehensible. Well, I think that the code helps it be much, much more comprehensible.
So why don't you get the review?
I'm going to get that.
And tell us what people initially thought about Emily Dickinson.
Yes, sorry. Okay, this is so. In 1890. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sure. In Susan Dickinson is a very important person here. She was an orphan from Elmira, New York, but she was really from around here, around in Massachusetts. Her family was from Massachusetts, and she and her sister were orphaned, and they were brought here, and they were brought up by relatives of Emily Dickinson, and everyone was in love with her when she came to town. She was a math teacher. She was extremely well-read. She was a person who read Emily's poetry as it happened and recognized Emily's genius very early. What happened, the marriage fell apart. They had this adulterous affair with Mabel Todd and so on. But one has to recognize the meaning Susan Dickinson had for Emily, and I have a quote, and I'll read it later maybe. Anyway, Mabel Todd and Lavinia, who was her younger sister, with mostly Mabel Todd doing the work, got together a wonderful little volume of Emily's poems that was published in 1880 something. It had the Indian pipes. This is these non-photosynthetic plants. They look like fungi, but they're definitely plants with seeds and flowers. And some of you have seen Indian pipes. But the painting of Indian pipes was on the cover of this volume. And the volume was reviewed in 1892. Now, in 1892, Austin was still alive. He died in Mabel Todd's arms. He was much older than Mabel Todd in 1895, so 3 years later he died. Susan was still alive, and she was actually going to court against the family. I mean, the feud was in the courts. It was so bad about who owned both the property and the poems. Lavinia was still alive, and Mabel, who put this together, didn't die till 1932, so of course she was very much alive. She was a pilot, a poet, and so on. So in 1892 in the Atlantic Monthly, this is the review of the very first, very limited edition of the poetry. On Emily Dickinson, Thomas Bailey Aldrich, very appropriate name for that group of people, in 1892 says, an eccentric, dreamy, half-educated recluse in an out-of-the-way New England village or anywhere else cannot, with impunity, set at defiance the laws of gravitation and grammar. Oblivion lingers in her immediate neighborhood. So just complete dismissal of her work. It's published in the book called Rotten Reviews, and they're rotten reviews of everybody famous, including Shakespeare. I mean, you want to read them; they're just hilarious. But I skipped a slide. I want to show you. I want to read to you. It's a very interesting one because when Emily was very young, she was recognized as brilliant. She had a book in her hand all the time. She was very social and active. Her father's house was exactly where everything was happening. He was right in the center of Amherst. They were students of Reverend Edward Hitchcock. Both she and Clark were students, who was the one who discovered the dinosaurs. Well, the dinosaurs were brought from Greenfield to him. The great bird tracks, which turned out to be the dinosaurs in our valley. Hitchcock was the intellectual. He was the theologist-geologist. He was trained as a theologist. He was very, very seriously a theologian. But he was a wonderfully educated person. So I just want to tell you this early... I skipped it before because I could see why I wasn't going to get anywhere, but I want to read from her letter. She wrote voluminous letters, but only to a very small group of people that she trusted, her friends, and she was very honest and straightforward. But you could see this woman was very talented. She was one of the best students in school. She was very talented and very, very original. But she became more and more reclusive, and Ruth says, it's because the gossip was getting at her. She didn't want to, her friends had mostly moved away. She just didn't want to enter. She wouldn't go to church. She didn't want to enter the gossip mill. They called her Squire Dickinson's loony daughter, And so she just withdrew. But when she withdrew, she was already 30 or something. And all of her friends were married and away or dead, too. She had a lot of that problem, too. At any rate, this is before this time. In fact, she's only 22, and this is when she is being social and going to classes and so on. And she writes this letter to Susan Gilbert Dickinson, who's her sister-in-law, who's very much her same age. I think they're exactly the same age, and who's really her best friend. They were all in love with her. Austin was in love with her, Susan was in love with her, and so on. She said, and her father was a Whig. Whig, W-H-I-G, was that very sort of reactionary conservative party at the time. And he was in Washington for one term. And William Smith Clark also was in Boston at the State House for a term, I think one term. Anyway, so she writes to Susan Dickinson, why can't I be a delegate to the great Whig convention? Don't I know all about Daniel Webster and the tariff and the law? Then, Susie, I could see you during a pause in the session, but I don't like this country at all, and I shan't stay here any longer. Delenda est America, Massachusetts and all. Well, what is delenda est? Carthago delenda est was the Roman senator Marcus Cato saying that Carthago, must be destroyed. So she's saying, delenda est America, Massachusetts and all, it must be destroyed. She was making her own political comments. And then at the bottom of this very well-known letter, it says, open me carefully. And she's talking about her letter, open me carefully. That has been the title of this book that is by Ellen Hart, who is the University of California, Southern California Writing Program, and Martha Nell Smith, who's very well known, professor of English and Emily Dickinson scholar, who should really see Luescher's papers at the University of Maryland. And they use it, and as does Luescher too in some of it, to say it was a lesbian relationship, and that's why she was so embarrassed about it. And they make a big case about that. Well, there may have been, but not like William Smith Clark. Anyway, Open Me Carefully is the name of their book, arguing that her relationship that was so intense was really a lesbian one. more questions.
Is this, do you think this sexual awakening of Emily Dickinson, which you see and Luescher sees and others see as the source of her poetry and the source of her genius, but is this, I mean, are all of these biographies attempts to explain that, to try and get at that truth because we have so little gossip to go on?
Yeah. There's a lot of people, especially Amherst, women my age, who want to argue that she had a very active emotional life, but there was no physical. It was mystical. It was not physical at all. So, I mean, the arguments are going to go on. Ruth is going to win because Ruth has read every newspaper article of the time and all the diaries and has lived with these notes. And she's got the name of a gossip in Amherst in exactly that time who's left all her papers in Detroit. And Ruth won't come out with her book until she goes to Detroit, and she's afraid to go to Detroit for da-da-da-da. And she has to go to Washington, too. But when she finishes, she's going to win, because Ruth Owen Jones is a really careful scholar, and she bases it on evidence. And it's the Philadelphia Academy of Arts and Sciences or someplace like that, advertised that they had to get rid of a lot of stuff, and they made a whole long list, and one of them was all of Mabel Loomis Todd's paintings, and nobody had heard of Mabel Loomis Todd, and Ruth bought them all for $300, the whole set of them. So she's really onto this. The other thing is there's another book that the fans know. It's called it's a quote from Emily Dickinson, "My Wars Are Laid Away in Books" by Harbinger, is that
Yes,
somebody on the West?
Habiger.
What's his name?
Alfred Habiger.
Habiger. And Habiger has the diaries. The diaries have been released of Mabel Todd in Austin, and they made double lines every time they had sexual intercourse in that house. It was her father was dead and her mother was dying, or vice versa. They were just off the scene, and Lavinia was still living in the house, and little Millicent Todd, who's the daughter of David Todd, who was the astronomer, was coming home from school, and nobody, and the Irish housemaid told everybody that was going on, and she thought it was awful. But in other words, the Mabel Todd stuff is all public information, and Harbinger has stuff from his readings that bear on this, from his readings of Austin and the mother, who was a recluse upstairs most of her life. Anyway, it's can't be hidden. They burnt all the papers. I mean, they were asked to burn, all the letters were burnt. So, you're not going to get that. But you're going to get, for example, there's no secret to the amount of time they spent in class and the field trips they went on and the plants. I mean, very unusual for a man just before the Civil War. He almost died in the Civil War, like William Smith Clark. Very unusual for him to be describing plants in detail. I mean, he was a botanist and brought home plants that are in the Emily Dickinson Museum right now on the grounds. Trees, the Katsuma tree, identified them, put them in that what's the name of the glass house there, the what is it called though? Oh, come on, we all know what it is. Yeah. No, but it's not the conservatory that her father built her. It's the one on the campus. It's the Imitation England. What is it? It's a crystal house on the campus. Anyway, he not only did he bring home plants and get them propagated, and brought plants to Japan, but they are still there in many. In Amherst, there are still plants labeled on the campus, William Smith Clark, with the proper name of Japanese plants. This love of plants was mutual. And there's going to be enough evidence that they were enough places at the same time. For example, Lyndall Gordon, who wrote this, My Lives Are, what is it? Lives Like Loaded Guns, which, it's got a lot of merit to it. I like that book very much. But Lyndall Gordon wants to have Emily have epilepsy, and there's a very little evidence for that. Her nephew, Ned, did have epilepsy. But she went to have her eyes taken care of. But she got off the train in Palmer because William Smith Clark was in Boston when she went to Cambridge to get her eyes fixed for a month or something. And Ruth is virtually certain they saw each other, and she wrote to somebody and said, I'm going to get off at Palmer, because she didn't want to be seen getting off the train with William Smith Clark. So that kind of stuff is going to add up. The botany, the interest in German and other languages, it's just going to add up, and Ruth is going to find out because she's already got lots of evidence.
Okay.
Oh.
You're listening to Lynn Margulis discussing Yellow, Decoding Emily Dickinson. I've asked a lot of questions. Now we'll take some questions from the audience. So please go to the microphone. I'm sure there are people with questions.
Thank you. Yeah, Jim has just told us. The Durfee Conservatory, which has still got lots of economically important plants, nicotiana, tobacco, and deadly nightshade and all that stuff.
Thank you for a delightful and intriguing presentation. My question is, if you recall Dr. Roger Bannister, Dr. Roger Bannister, of Britain, who broke the 4-minute mile back in the 1950s.
Wrote the what?
He broke the 4-minute mile record.
Oh, I do. I remember
Yes.
him, but he's from Oxford.
Anyway,
I do remember
athletes will recall that coaches implore their athletes to keep it for the game.
Yeah.
Don't spend it
Yeah.
on morning and all that.
Yeah.
In your opinion,
Yeah. You should
but
say
then-
your name, by the way, for the
What?
radio audience. Please.
My name, Bob Cable.
Thank you.
Later it was revealed that Dr. Bannister had had intercourse with his fiancée just minutes before he broke the 4-minute mile.
Well, your coach is probably wrong.
In your opinion, is suppressed and sublimated sex, or actually indulged sex, more of a stimulus to academic work?
Yes, well, I have a student who's really a professional astrologer, who's a PhD student, who's the person from whom, I've had 40 students, but the one from whom I've learned the most. And the thing he's taught is temporal cycles, to be totally aware of diurnal cycles, around here, seasonal cycles, 4 seasons, more than 4 seasons maybe, the change in temperature in the fall. What I'm saying to you is that these kinds of, everything you can measure in the body of mammals, of course, including humans, it has cycles. These hormones go up and down, sweat goes up and down, melatonin goes up and down, melanin goes up and down. Everything we can deal with is on a temporal cycle. And of course, that's the case with urges to both have sex and write poetry. I mean, it's not, you can't say, is it more than? The answer is, except in biology exams, the answer in life is always more than one of the above is true. Mm-hmm.
If you're going to, would you come over to the microphone?
You must walk to,
No,
you must. It's radio. You have to go talk in the microphone.
Right, it will.
It's
it
not.
may be
It's
on
not
the radio. It's
television
being recorded.
at all. It's radio.
My name's Charles. I just wanted to add something to that will help maybe clarify some things for people who are following that question. I read recently that orgasm increases dopamine levels, which is hormonal, by tenfold.
By what?
By 10 times.
Uh-huh.
So that's why, and dopamine does help people perform better, function better as well in their lives.
Right.
So it is significant.
But
yeah.
it goes up and it goes down. and
Yes,
goes
then
up
it will
and
go
goes
back
up.
down again, and this sort of
Yes.
thing. Also, food. That's why people overeat. Raises dopamine levels.
Yes,
Yes.
especially those who eat chocolate.
Yeah. Well, they say that things like bananas and avocados.
Bananas?
Bananas, avocados, and there's certain foods which will particularly raise dopamine levels.
Will raise
not
dopamine
chocolate.
in this
Yeah,
case.
chocolate is actually good because of the antioxidants.
Pardon?
Chocolate is good because of the antioxidants, antioxidant values. But anyway, that's, I just wanted to help clarify.
Well, you're reiterating another example of this cyclicity. It's not, is it more than? It's
Yes, yes.
cyclicity of almost everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, sir.
My name is Marie Murray. I noticed in your speech you didn't mention epilepsy, and then you finally said a few words like it wasn't so. But in the latest things I've been reading, it was the central factor of her life, supposedly.
It was Lyndall Gordon that you were reading, though. Lyndall Gordon's book.
I read it in a newspaper thing,
Yeah.
a big article in the newspaper.
Yeah.
And supposedly, Emily refused to marry Judge Lord because of this. And I wondered if there was a code word in the poetry for epilepsy.
Oh, I don't know about the code word, but I do think, I asked Ruth about this epilepsy, and she said that they are inferring it from the kind of medication that was taken, and she said that medication was for almost everything. And there was that in her opinion, after studying this for so long, there's no evidence that Emily herself had epilepsy. There's lots of evidence that Ned did, and Ned had problems at birth. Ned died when he was, I think, in his late 40s or 50s. He was the son of Susan and Austin. They had 3 children, Bianchi, I forget her, anyway, Martha, they call her Maddie, Dickinson, Bianchi. She was really the leader of the Susan Dickinson side, the resistance against Mabel Todd. She married this count who was supposed to be Russian, and in fact he was penniless, and he married her for the money, and she didn't live with him hardly at all. But she was very active in trying to keep the poetry and the land in the family. The second child of Austin and Susan was Ned. Both Ned and Maddie took the sides of their mother very strongly. And the third child was Gilbert. And he was a gorgeous, wonderful child. Everybody adored him. He died of high fever of a childhood disease when he was 7. And until 5 years ago or something, Amherst College kept that room closed. And I urge you to go to that room. By that room, I mean the Italianate house built by Father Dickinson, Edward Dickinson, for this couple, Austin and Susan Dickinson. By the time, and Emily was very close to Gilbert. He was like her own kid. But by the time he was 7 and the night he died, for 2 years, Emily had not been fewer than 100 meters to the next door house. Today, you can go, they've opened both houses. The other house has been open for a long time. The house of Emily's father, the original house made by Samuel Fowler Dickinson, who was the grandfather. That house is 1830 or something, and it looks more modern than our house, which is 1903. But right next door, they've also opened Gilbert's room with his rocking horse and his crib. And anyway, Ned's epilepsy was common knowledge. He had all of the symptoms, and the medication matches, and it wasn't a secret at all about Ned's epileptic problems. but there was no evidence at all that Emily really did suffer. And I'm talking from Ruth's point of view. I mean, it's an argument from authority. I don't study this stuff, but she does. So I don't think there's a good case for epilepsy at all. But it's coming out very loud in Lyndall Gordon's book. And according to Ruth, it's because Lyndall Gordon's mother had epilepsy or has it.
And you said that her experience with sex was mostly spiritual or
No, that is
creative.
what many people think. That was an answer to Pat Serkey's question.
So she wasn't a virgin when she died.
I can't imagine anyone writing
Write that kind of poetry
no.
graphically.
I can't.
so-
Not only rapidly, but those 7 years where they were together, because you see, he went to the war and he was reported dead. So, but the 7 years that they were really crossing each other's property all of the time to get home, during those 7 years, and his wife has had 11 children, you know, during those 7 years, she wrote, in some of them, 3 poems of major importance in a day. I mean, she was dedicated completely to this poetry activity, and they're unbelievably original. I mean, no one has written stuff like that.
Hi, my name is William Holton, and I'm wondering if you'd like to comment on the poem "My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun," especially in the lines where she says that now we roam the sovereign woods, now we hunt the doe.
Hunt the what? The doe?
Now we hunt the doe.
The female deer?
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, with all of these sexual overtones in the poem, and I believe they are true, I think that a lot of her energy came from that, which actually goes right back to this gentleman who mentioned that. I think that a lot of her momentum came from that.
Yeah.
And having William Clark at such close proximity gave her that momentum.
Yeah. Well, everything I know about my life is Lives Like Loaded Guns comes from this book by Lyndall Gordon. So I can't tell you anything about that. I tend to think that book is, which most of it takes place, coming into the 20th century. It's much later than the feud. It's the results of the family feud with the publications. But I think that she's right that the lot of the loaded gun aspect was because, well, Emily stayed out of the feud. She herself, she obviously condoned and knew all about this affair that was going on all the time in her house, but she didn't want to be published particularly. She never pushed publication. She was just out of that. She let them fight about it. But they did fight about it. They fought about everything.
I was just wondering about these boxes. It sounds like there must be hundreds and hundreds of them. Do you have
Well, at least 100, yeah.
Are these just, from what you know, theoretical speculations on, after all, I don't think this Luescher guy ever had access to her biographical or much
No,
of her.
he had only really access to published stuff, right? I mean, he didn't have any authentic material at all, like these other people have. I have pictures here. You come up here and take a look at these pictures of the way the boxes are organized now, because these are Swiss people and they're really clean and neat and organized. But if you want to look at that, I'll show you.
You don't know what kinds of things
Oh,
are.
I do.
Yeah.
Come and look at that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on.
This minute?
This is, I mean, it goes on for walls and walls, but this is what Amsler has done to those boxes. So, I mean, Luescher, mostly by hand, but now he's computerizing it. I mean, that's the whole point. I'm sorry. It's the whole point right now of Amsler's work is to get it all typed in, to get it all dated when the dates are there, to get all the pictures of the same thing organized, to pull out the Emily Dickinson he was writing for a Swiss newspaper, and he was, Luescher was writing a lot of other things, and he was also a Swiss guide in the mountains in California, western and southern California. So it's his whole legacy that's in Amsler's hands, and Amsler is trying to make the job easier for the archivist. He's not editorializing at all. He's just, I mean, Luescher's handwriting is better than Emily's. You know, he really can figure out what he's saying. So Luescher just is acting almost as a librarian here, which is, and I think he wants to do as much of that as possible before he gives it up. But I think he's going to, in the end, see that to send it to Amherst to the Jones Library is like burning it. It's ridiculous to do that. I mean, Ruth is the first person to tell you they have no facilities to really keep archive material at all. They have no facilities, they have no staff. Anyway.
That may be the result of Emily's wish that Massachusetts dead end est. It may be coming around in a way she never expected. But I guess if I were to try and sum up, Luescher's argument seems to be completely undercutting the Freudian notion of sublimation. And the idea that Emily Dickinson wrote these poems to, express an unfulfilled life.
Oh, I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all, because so much of this passionate love was thwarted because they had so much time, especially when his life is in danger. He rallied and he brought, I don't know what group of soldiers, but a large group from Amherst, including a very young, talented son of friends. And he told him, come on, we've got to fight this war. He was very pro-war until he was in the war for a while. And that young man was killed. And Clark himself was given up as lost. And for, I don't know, a few weeks, the news came back home that he was dead. So much of this affair was separation that there's plenty of room for sublimation there, I think. I think it's, it's for each ecstatic instant we must an anguish pay. I mean, that's her in keen and quivering ratio to the ecstasy. And that's genius.
So let me ask you one last question.
Sure.
Why is Emily Dickinson your favorite poet? How do you
Because I
relate
know her
yourself
better,
to
I think.
her?
I just, I didn't know much about her until my graduate students gave me a gift on my birthday just after I moved here to Amherst from Boston, actually, area. And I was amazed at the variation, a lot of her sentiments are extremely obvious, unlike the ones I read tonight, and they're all nature-loving. She's very in tune with seasons, with birds. Bees are black with gilts or singles, buccaneers of buzz, ride abroad in ostentation and subsist on fuzz. Fuzz ordained, not fuzz contingent, marrows of the hill. Jugs a universe's fracture could not jar or spill. Lots of stuff is not sexual at all, obviously. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. I mean, she's very ironic. She exposes people's puffiness, I don't know, pretensions. She doesn't tolerate them at all. She's very critical of that. And I think it's the nature that I love most of all. But
And she was very scientific with her nature.
absolutely, mostly the botany with her. I think you got the herbarium here, right?
We
The
don't have it.
herbarium. I saw it was on your flyer.
It's on the
But
flyer.
I urge you, if anyone likes plants, to look at this herbarium. She very carefully, but she stopped it when she was quite young, but she pressed plants. She identified them. She put, when she knew them, the scientific names, and she put the common names all the time. Very few are unidentified. And this was an activity, she participated with him in this. It was public that she did that. And he was training horses. He was galloping through her yard. I mean, it's, I think it's very heterosexual, most of her stuff. Anyway, you want me to, I have the last word?
Yes,
Let her
you have the last word. You have the last word, or
No,
she can have it.
She has it. For nature is a stranger yet. The ones who sight her most have not passed her haunted house nor simplified her ghost. To pity those who know her not is helped by the regret that those who know her less the nearer her they get. That's Emily on nature. She's talking to us, biologists and stuff.
Thank you, Lynn Margulis.